Thank you, Bert and Natasha. We'll now move straight on to our next three speakers, and I think we'll move straight into it with a man who needs no introduction, our latest Greenhill Johnston Life Fellow, Dr. Matthew Tanner. Matthew.
Thank you, Vincent, and good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. This is the historic ships session, and my mind is now filled with some kind of horror about maybe we're funded according to the sheer tonnage of historic ships that we each have. I think the UK may win, and that's partly what my talk is about, but there's a big competition going on. I want to talk to you about the nature of what we do with historic ships and perhaps what ICMM could do in the future to help with some of the major challenges that we all face. In 2005, there were 50 vessels on the UK National Historic Fleet, the core collection, that is, of the ships that we value most. There are now 200. And each one is considered to be preeminent in some ways. Here's some of them. But I take as my title, half a title. I can see there's an error here. The bit that's missing in the purple banner says, "Are we still on the road to hell?" Ah. I'm on the road to digital hell already. And I'm taking as my text for today the great paper by Campbell McMurray, known to many of us here, that he gave virtually this day, 30 years ago, in Boston. Ship Preservation, A Road to Hell, Paved with Good Intentions. And I can't read the notes because the text has disappeared. I told you this would be. Just one moment, please. Getting there. Right, yes. So I'm asking the question, are we still on this road to hell? Or have we got there already? May well be. But there are other prophets in this particular wilderness. Colin White, of course, his great paper about too many preserved ships, and Neil Yanish in 1982. But Campbell himself said, "I am favorably disposed to the idea of preserving ships, even large ones, but not too many." Well, we just can't help ourselves, can we? Since then, says Campbell, perhaps driven by guilt or misplaced sentiment, and not infrequently by plain lack of judgment, ship preservation has gone mad. This is 30 years ago, remember? Worldwide, the International Register in 1999, the great book by Norman Brewer, lists 700 vessels over 40 feet. In Great Britain alone today, well, at that time was 250 of them, but today there are 2,000 vessels in the UK alone. And that's 600 more than in the entire worldwide fleet listed in this book. And we are registering new vessels onto the register faster than ever before. So surely we cannot go on like this, surely. So what are the issues? Well, here is old Ironsides, USS Constitution, built in 1797 and nearly every year since. And because preservation, of course, is a practice of deliberately extending a vessel's life beyond its natural economic and working span. And the motives for that may be religious, as with the solar bark, Khufu, genuinely religious, or HMS Victory, USS Constitution, with kind of patriotic motivations, or simply utilitarian, like floating restaurants and so forth. But mostly, it's emotional, isn't it? It's the emotional aspect, which of course is why we're here. We share that love of the sea, the love of the maritime, and that emotion is very powerful, the romance, the nostalgia, and we don't like to let it go very easily. That's often the why, but we never really rationalize the positions we hold if we are honest with ourselves. We don't pin down the answers to the questions, who is it really for, and just what is it we are preserving? Here is the famous sinking of HMS Implacable, because we've been no different on this side of the Atlantic than they are on the other side. She sank with a warrior's death by the Royal Navy in 1947. She was, of course, a 74-gun ship that fought at Trafalgar in 1805 on the French side, and her solemn state funeral off Portsmouth, flags flying, guns saluting, while she was destroyed as one of the most significant artifacts from that period. And the newsreel stories of that sinking bring a tear to your eye and are held up as a record of the shocking desecration of British and French heritage. And so the myth of HMS Implacable has long been held up as, well, hangs rather like a cloud over ship preservation. The logo of the World Ship Trust is Implacable Never Again. It's a potent reminder of this unhappy episode and expresses that horror at this Philistinism. This is just terrible. But the World Ship Trust is no more, and I say to you that the fundamental idea of Implacable Never Again, oh, sorry. The punchline was just off the bottom of the page. Implacable Never Again, fundamental idea that everything that resonates with us emotionally, like this, should be saved, should now be challenged as an idea. Yet, we still want more. For example, only last year, a Type 21 frigate, HMS Ambassade, was released from the Pakistan Navy and has been handed over to a ship preservation group to bring back to the UK. We just can't help ourselves. And the dynamic kind of characters, lots of them are here, the kind of charisma that people have just drives these projects, charges through, full steam ahead, whatever. But we also find ourselves rationalizing these ideas into all sorts of kind of justifications about the rarity of the particular heritage. It's got the last surviving left-handed forward-pointing screw propeller, and therefore it's unique, therefore it must be saved. You laugh, but it's true. And of course, visitor number projections are notoriously wild in many business plans for ship projects. And there are many projects that run aground on these points, of course. But can we ever contain such enthusiasms? Probably not. Do we want to contain such enthusiasm? No, maybe not. But let's consider the case. This is the Tomini Solano, a bulk carrier built in 2016. She's currently, I checked this morning, she's just off Brazil, and she's available for ship preservation. A bulk carrier like this, representative of the extension of the windjammers, of all of the multiple coastal schooners, is terribly significant. So who's going to take her? And what about MMS, a container ship, the revolution of the 20th and 21st centuries, drives world, as we know, and the IMO knows, of course, the entirety of the world economic trade is driven by ships like this. And I think she's actually really rather stylish for such a big object. So surely somebody would like her? Yes, there's that. Ah, yes. Right, that's the end of my presentation. She's currently just off South Africa, heading towards Hong Kong, I think, so my Hong Kong colleagues could step up. Richard, yes, Richard's put his hand up. So no takers really, were there? Instead, we have a lot of these, sad ships, sad people. This is Wingfield Castle in Hartlepool, a paddle steamer, at the end of another boom and bust cycle of preservation. And there are casualties all around us. This is, on the left, this is a light ship in the UK, the Planet, that worked off Liverpool, and on the right, Egremont, a Mersey ferry. And we should probably agree with Campbell McMurray again when he said in his great paper, the pioneering days of ship preservation are surely over, and our task is to bring under control and secure what we have. The chances are that this will mean a few more casualties before a new, more modest, but possibly sustainable equilibrium is reached. Well, the pioneering days are behind us, but that chance of a modest, sustainable equilibrium has not turned out very well, has it? For actually right now, we need no more ships. The National Historic Ships Unit in the UK keeps a register of vessels at risk in the UK. Sorry, here we go. Keeps a register And it does that on a traffic light system, kind of green, amber, and red. And currently, 30% of the vessels are at red. 30% are in immediate danger and at risk. And these are only 2 of them. They're currently declared for deconstruction, breaking up, sale, but they've already had 4 or 5 different schemes or enthusiasts or these people with charisma trying to save them, because the emotion keeps coming, charging back in, and there's somebody trying to buy one, I believe, right now. But they're kind of legally abandoned at Sharp Ness. And this is what I call a zombie ship, a ship that can never die, never allowed to die. Murray again said, I venture to say that within 50 to 100 years, most of the presently preserved vessels will have disappeared. Well, he said that 30 years ago, and as I said, the opposite has happened. Yet, in the UK, that has been driven to a great extent by the advent of the National Lottery, which has been probably the greatest thing that has ever happened to culture, certainly in the UK, but it's something that has been completely wonderful. The injection of capital funding into culture and heritage is phenomenal. But in fact, we've made a huge rod for our own backs. The transformative power of major capital investments, indeed my career at the SS Great Britain was built on £40 million worth of investment. What we've done, though, of course, is to create the need for sustainable business plans, for creating revenue-positive organizations and structures that can actually sustain the things that we create with this revenue. And every time you apply for a big grant, you have to do that. But it doesn't work. After the initial honeymoon period, the sheer costs of maintenance and so forth run away with the very optimistic business plans for numbers and yield and so forth. It's really a very familiar and sad story everywhere we go. So we've got this strange system in the UK where we are over-capitalized in historic ships, and we do not have the revenue, and we cannot generate the revenue to sustain them. It's bonkers. So we are generating zombie ships as we speak. Some, of course, do find valid reuses and viable uses. This is Af Chapman in Stockholm, a successful youth hostel and something of a landmark. Excuse me. And the equally lovely Rotterdam, which some of us saw on the boat trip on Sunday night. Very nice hotel and restaurant. And sadly, Neris and I couldn't afford to stay there, but we were really hoping to do so. And then, of course, the great irony, and I'm not picking on this particular ship, Mikkel, at all. It's just generally this idea that when we actually don't have one of the ships that we want, we then go and find the resources to build one. So, not having enough historic ships already, we then build more just because we think there's a gap. And of course, there is some real value in experimental archaeology. The trireme Olympias is probably the best example. But the replica concept is frequently just as, if not more, unsustainable and provides or offers massive compromises in safety or convenience that undermines the public or intellectual value. This is the replica 15th century Matthew in Bristol, an attractive but very rough outline of the original 15th century vessel, built for a one-off anniversary and then forlornly searching for a livelihood ever since. She runs evening trips up and down Bristol Harbour under engine power, 15th century engine power, to pick up fish and chips and back in the harbour. Yes, of course, heritage and ship heritage is, I've just been warned I've got 5 minutes, so I've got about 20 minutes left, Vincent. Yes, of course, heritage is really a performative fiction, to steal a phrase. This is the Medway Queen, a very smart-looking paddle steamer. She's a survivor of Dunkirk, the great evacuation in 1940. Or is she? Because this is an example where nostalgia and the assumption all around recent memory of these events has driven heritage beyond the kind of vanishing point, a singularity, where there is nothing on this vessel that dates before 2007. The the hull, when a big project came through, the hull was shown to be in such bad state, and you can see in the little inset pictures, that they gave up and just built a completely new vessel. The lottery fund realized too late that their contract committed them to fund the vessel irrespective of how much historic material was to be left in the project. And the volunteers that enthusiastically run her sell her to the public as a Dunkirk vessel. But fine, there's no harm in that, is there? And there are many examples of this. But what I'm saying to you is that there is harm, for what is our role here as maritime museums? Are we just nostalgia mongers? Are we just selling kind of Disney-esque theme parks? Because that's kind of what this is becoming. But do we actually endeavor to mediate and apply rigor to the fiction here to make it as robust and as authentic as possible and have the maximum value and meaning? Or are we just joining in enthusiastically with this full steam ahead? I think I know what you would say, and maybe what ICMM would say. I think ICMM would want to talk about a long-term cultural purpose for maritime museums, and that we look to preserve the past for the future. And if we are not being sustainable now, if the ships are rotting beneath us, as they usually are, or we're just sinking under the sheer number of ships, then we will fail the future. It's really very simple. And surely, what I'm trying to say is that the maritime museums of the world, which you represent, they are the institutions that should pick up the responsibility in this. Let everyone else do what they want to do. Let them go steaming to Dunkirk. But let's be clear about what we as maritime museums are actually for and who we are for that differentiates us from that. This is, you don't need to read it, but this is the new ICOM definition of a museum, which is pretty good, I think, after their hiccups in creating it. But this is the ICMM definition, which I don't believe has changed since 1972. I think it's inside the Constitution. We've never really fiddled with it. But it mentions nothing about the marine environment, nothing about why we do what we do, and nothing about who we do this for. So I'm calling upon ICMM actually to review this definition, really to help us all to actually pin down much more specifically about what is our role as maritime museums and how that differentiates from nostalgia mongering. We have got lots of things in our armory. The great work that the UK Historic Ships has done with the trilogy, the 3 books that must be on every shelf of every ship and boat manager in the world. Everybody, hands up, everyone that's got them on the shelves? Oh, that's half. So the others, it's all available online, and ICMM may well be helping disseminate these fantastic books. The guidance here is really first class. And of course, there are other options, and the guidance helps you lead to other options for sustainability. This is perhaps the best example in the UK at the moment, which is the Dutch schooner De Wadden, Irish sea schooner, and she has been recorded using modern techniques, and the amount of data that you can get out today is just remarkable. And now she's being broken up, and many museums are fighting for bits. So to return to Implacable, here she is at Greenwich. Just go and have a look. Sir James Caird paid £300 to have the stern taken off, and she's now on display in the National Maritime Museum at Greenwich. But to insist that preservation embraces only this physical form is foolish. There are many other ways of dealing with what we have. So what should we keep? Well, again, this is where ICMM can start to help its members actually start to make the choices about what will people in 100 years' time thank us for keeping. Not what people, the nostalgia of today wants, but what will happen in 100 years' time. What's the stuff that if we had a time machine, we could go back and collect because we can see how significant or important it might be. It's the Maritime Museum's job to do this. Nil Desperandum is the name of this vessel. Don't despair. Instead, this is a call to action to ICMM. Let's really pin these things down and get things under control, as Campbell McMurray once said. Thank you very much indeed, and I look forward to discussing.
Thank you so much, Matthew. I'm sure all of us feel that talk in our bones and from personal experience as well. And we'll look forward to having a bit of an opportunity to chat about that at the end of the 3 presentations with our panel. So now we'll move on to Dr. Ray Ashley, President and CEO of San Diego Maritime Museum, a role he's held since 1995, and he told me this morning he's retiring at the end of this year as well. So this is an extra enjoyable conversation. So Dr. Ashley, I'll move on so you can use my time.
Thank you. So indeed, this will be the last talk I give while I'm employed by someone. So I'm going to have a good time with it. So I hope this will seem as a nice segue from Matthew's talk, because I think one of the key elements of that talk all the way through was significance and some regimen for determining significance. Now, I hadn't thought of that when Dr. Tim Runyon and I co-authored a paper that was published in Sea History in the most recent issue, in which you might find laying around on the tables, and this presentation is based upon, but indeed that is another element, I think, of what we're talking about. So I'm going to start with a non-maritime thing. The Buddhas of Banyan of Afghanistan, which had stood since the 7th century, were destroyed by the Taliban in 2001. And then Palmyra, Syria, which is a 3rd century Roman city, that was blown up by the Islamic State in 2015. Now, both of these episodes of wanton destruction produced horror around the world, and the reaction commensurate with a sense that these things are the patrimony of all humanity. They're irreplaceable treasures, and it's the responsibility of every nation to take care of them. So in a way, these acts of deliberate destruction were a war on all humanity, preceding acts of terrorism and linked to them, I think. On the other hand, the Falls of Clyde in Honolulu was proposed to be destroyed by its own museum, scuttled in 2008, and today languishes on the Honolulu waterfront. She's been delisted from the National Register of Historic Places, and I think they're in the process of final preparations to take the ship out and scuttle her. And that will be the end of what was once a vessel on the National Register. The USS Olympia, I think things are going slightly better for, but it was proposed by her museum, the Independent Seaport Museum, to scuttle the ship in 2011. They have since recanted on that and are endeavoring to raise the millions of dollars necessary to keep this ship going, but indeed it's a daunting task. Now, the difference between the first 2 examples and these 2 is that the first 2, in addition to being obviously monumental works of art and architecture, are also formally recognized and signified by virtue of their being World Heritage Sites. And there are no ships, however, that are World Heritage Sites. But all sites, including, and I think this is also the case with the examples that Matthew brought up, like any historic site, a ship may be of world significance, but it's up to the surrounding community to try and take care of it and sustain it, which is not easy to do. Also, like any historic site of world significance, without popular understanding of that significance, the resources are difficult and sometimes impossible to generate, which again, in Matthew's talk, we saw several examples of. Now, World Heritage Sites are sites of surpassing significance to humanity, identified by the World Heritage Organization, which is an arm of UNESCO. The way something gets to be a World Heritage Site is that their country, at the rate of 1 per year, can move a site to what's called the tentative list, and then is selected for inclusion in the nomination file by the International Convention on Monuments and Sites, and also the World Conservation Convention. They, in turn, make recommendations to the World Heritage Committee, which is composed of 21 states parties elected by the UN General Assembly. So this program has been in effect for a long time, again with the convention concerning the protection of the world's natural and cultural heritage, and adopted by the General Conference of UNESCO in 1972 and signed by 192 nations, making it one of the world's most, I would say, popular or at least accepted international treaties. And all of the sites that you see here, the postcard places like the Parthenon or Angkor Wat or the Taj Mahal, they all number as heritage sites. Worldwide, there are 1,199 individual sites. 933 of those are cultural, 227 cultural natural sites, and interestingly enough, there's actually more endangered species and endangered flora and fauna in the cultural sites than there are in the natural sites. But so they do cross over some. There are 39 mixed sites, which are both, and 45 transboundary sites distributed among 138 nations. Now, the transboundary sites are sites that cross borders. And in a transboundary site, that does not get to be part of the only one per year quota that that limits a nation's recommendations to the nomination file. Now, these are where they are distributed around the world. If you note, they tend to be clustered along the coastlines of the world, and as opposed to the interior regions, not exclusively. But in a way, it's a kind of another version of that map we were presented yesterday, where we look at the land instead of the sea, and we are used to seeing our culture distributed in the same way. Italy has the most of these, with 59 of them, followed by China with 57. And there's not a single work of naval architecture among any of these lists. There are sites that are related to maritime heritage or maritime history. The site of Lanza Meadows, where the Vikings landed. There's the naval complex of Karlskrona. There's Liverpool Maritime City, and there is Maritime Greenwich. But it's the buildings and the infrastructure necessary to service the maritime trade that is the site itself, rather than the ships. There are, again, transboundary sites, the frontiers of the Roman Empire, Hadrian's Wall, the Antonine Wall, and the barriers and walls and forts in Germany. There are a series of missions in Texas, linked by a road. There is the El Camino Real Terrena Ardente in Mexico, and that may one day extend into the United States. Some of these tend to be pathways of trade and commerce. The longest is probably the Silk Road, which is a couple thousand miles long, again, is a World Heritage Site. I'm not going to read to you all of these criteria, but these are criteria by which architectural or architectural sites are selected, or artificial sites are selected. They were clearly written for buildings, but if you substitute in all of these criteria the word building, a work of architecture, then ships are not only eligible, but they would seem to be extremely eligible examples of what should be considered as a site of World Heritage. And again, I'm not going to read these to you because I don't want to take as long as I otherwise would. But just to go, but to enumerate the qualities of these ships, the significant ones that would recommend their inclusion in this list, they are works of naval architecture. It's a subspecies of architecture, but it is indeed a discipline of architecture. For the people who built these things, they were often the largest, most complex and imposing elements of the landscape where they were built, the largest thing you could see anywhere around. Ships are collectively repositories as well as conveyances of culture. They represented the first worldwide large-scale technological system in history, as well as the first and last such system in which people, things, and ideas move together within the same package. Today, those pathways are broken into a lot of different streams with the internet and radio and television and so forth, and ships and planes and cars. But for a while, it was the only thing that carried all of those things together in one package around the world. As opposed to terrestrial sites, ships are also signified by what they're either floating in or what they're tied up next to. In other words, emphasizing the sea itself as a pathway to trade, commerce, and the projection of power, and all of these stories that we tell about those things. Reflecting on the connective nature of the enterprise of the sea and its influence on world events, the ship as a site, I'm having trouble reading it. The ship as a site unto itself is in itself and by itself sort of disassociated from the rest, but they constitute a collective story. They constitute what would legitimately be a transnational site. And recognition of the great historic vessels represent the patrimony of humanity, and that the sea is a field of world heritage furthers UNESCO's own goals in the preservation of underwater archaeology of underwater sites. And some of the underwater sites also could conceivably be eligible for inclusion within this list. And as we've seen, there are many of these sites that are identified as World Heritage Sites by virtue of their connection with the sea. There's no way to appropriately recognize and memorialize the enterprise of the sea by restricting the representation exclusively to the dockyards and naval yards and the complexes bereft of the ships, which were their main purpose. In neglecting recognizing the historic ships as a World Heritage Site is to ignore the role of seafaring in the development of civilization and to put some of these treasures at risk. Now, I should say that's my understanding that the Viking ships in Oslo are on the tentative list for Norway, so they have at least, those vessels have at least made it to the first stage. And the great historic ships represent the last and remaining remnants of an architectural construct which once spanned the entire world. Now, what we are arguing for this is the significance of the stories all of us tell, and that the understanding of the relationship of humanity and the sea is crucial to the understanding of our history. It's not only in our own discipline that that argument has been made. The oceanic ship has been identified as the genesis of the modern era and an elemental factor in the onset of the Anthropocene. Now, that's a controversial concept. Some geologists and biologists believe that we have moved from the Holocene epoch into something called the Anthropocene epoch, based upon the effect of human activity on the world's climate. And that has actually, it's in a very short time, produced an entirely different environmental context for life on Earth. That argument was made in defining the Anthropocene in the journal Nature by Lewis and Maslin in 2015, pinning the start of the Anthropocene at 1610 with obviously the advent of worldwide trade with the origins of the oceanic sailing ship, connecting all the places in the world for the first time, which in their argument suggests that this particular development may have been one of the most important factors in the Earth's history in the last 10 million years. So obviously, when we talk about significance, there are in other disciplines and other areas that is recognized to some extent. So for a long time now, we've come to understand that our notion of humanity is the stories that we tell of ourselves, and an understanding that those stories inhabit special places, and that those special places in turn convey value. I suspect that is the origin for the emotional attachment we have to these things, as Michael mentioned earlier. But I think, again, if we do not actually recognize in some formal way those stories and the places they inhabit and elevate their significance to a point that everyone can recognize, not just the people in our discipline, then again, will always be considered a fairly marginal element of world history, and will perceive the history and the human story in a way where the maritime endeavor is indeed always on the margins. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. For our final speaker in this session, I would like to welcome back to the stage Mr. Feng Zhao of the China National Maritime Museum. After his wonderful presentation yesterday on the full range and scope of maritime museums in China, Mr. Zhao will be sharing some thoughts today on the unique style and system of historic Chinese watercraft and the increasing knowledge of these vessels being uncovered by modern scholarship. Mr. Zhao.
Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to stand on the platform again. So with your encouragement, especially kindly help from Vincent, I feel relaxed a lot. So today, I would like to share maritime museums for protection and the heritage of traditional watercraft heritage. So first, I'm going to talk about why. Watercrafts are the vehicle, carrier, and living space for maritime activities, and one of the four core components of navigation. Traditional watercrafts have evolved from rafts and canoes to wooden boats and wooden sailing ships, which supported human beings' exploration toward the sea. Chinese traditional watercraft heritage has four characteristics. First, I think the history is long. Until now, the canoe and wooden paddle unearthed at an archaeological site are physical proofs that watercrafts has a history of at least 8,000 years in China. Secondly, I think the creative is strong. China has technological innovation in construction and utilization of ships. For example, from the clay ship model, we can see 2,000 years ago, in Han Dynasty, stern rudder was used in Chinese ship. Then the rudders improved continuously. And third, the type is rich. China has developed approximately thousands of types of watercrafts adapted to the regional navigation conditions. For example, French scholar Louis Audemars recorded over 500 types of Chinese watercrafts. And fourth, the distribution is wide. Watercraft heritage is collected by museums and private collectors all over China. In the waters of East Asia, there remain a large number of shipwreck sites to be found and excavated. From the worldwide perspective, traditional watercraft heritage carries the genes and memories of maritime civilization. It contains valuable cultural resources such as thinking, concepts, techniques, knowledge, and stories, and is drawing more and more attention. For example, Chinese junk wreck is still applied and studied by sailing enthusiasts around the world. Therefore, we have the responsibility and the necessity to protect, research, interpret, and pass on the traditional watercraft heritage. Then I would like to share our practice and the thinking of traditional watercraft heritage protection. The first is protection and research. Our starting point of traditional watercraft heritage is searching and collecting maritime relics and documents, which must be object-centered. Ships and their attached objects are the most reliable proofs. We focus on the collection of traditional watercraft and related relics. For example, the stone rudder of a Qing Dynasty seagoing ship unearthed in Yangtze River Delta. China has a continuous record of traditional watercrafts. Ships appeared on bronze whale, bamboo slips, paintings, and scholars' research results, likely the study of Watercraft. In recent years, we have continuously searched and sorted out documents related to traditional watercrafts. We have surveyed existing wooden ships and ships under construction. We also interview shipwrights, sailors, and fishermen to record their techniques. Ship models restored through research, including one-to-one antique real ships and ship models of other scales, could vividly reflect the appearance of traditional watercraft. We have paid special attention to inviting shipwrights to construct or restore ship models in our museum, and at the same time, we record them to keep the skill alive. Through research, documentary research, on-site investigation, recording of oral heritage materials, and the restoration of models, we accumulated abundant research results in order to share our research results from 2019 to 2023. We have published several books on traditional Chinese watercraft and science popularization. The third part of my presentation is sharing our interpretation and inheritance of traditional watercrafts. Traditional watercrafts should step out of our museum to the society. We have launched a series of exhibitions for the public and cooperated with school and design courses. Encourage our researchers to give speeches and lessons to the public. The value of our research result could be maximized only when it is entered on people. The young generation is the future of maritime career, and they are important participants of inheritance. The knowledge of traditional watercraft is sophisticated, which should be explained not only in words but also in practice. So we carry out experiencing ship model construction project, teaching training courses in school, and organize model ship competition for the young generation. Traditional Chinese shipbuilding skills are mainly passed on by oral communication and hands-on apprenticeship. We have organized the traditional ship model competition in our museum, which brought excellent models of shipwrights and technicians for exhibition. Then we could learn experience from them and transfer their techniques of designing, constructing, and restoring traditional ships to our staff. There are more stable and long-lasting collection, protection, inheritance, and utilization of the living techniques. Finally, I would like to make some suggestions on international exchange and cooperation of watercraft heritage. As far as we know, not only in China, there are various documentary and physical materials of traditional watercrafts around the world, including the unpublished results, for example, West, manuscripts, for example, Louis Altmont, photos, ship models, and so on. These materials are scattered and lack of systematic collection. In China, we are working on two projects for traditional watercraft heritage. One is to establish Chinese Traditional Watercraft Heritage Institute to gather more resources on a higher platform. And the second is to carry out a national survey on maritime cultural resources, especially traditional watercraft heritage, and from a comprehensive database in the coming years. However, the collection, space, human resources, funds, social relations, platforms of any museum are limited. For heritages with common historical or cultural connotations, the whole is more valuable than the sum of their parts. Therefore, for the protection, research, interpretation, and inheritance of watercraft heritage, we call for an open and sharing working mechanism with four specific suggestions. The first is to use digital technology to further expand the regional boundaries and overall value of watercraft heritage, and jointly build a more completed, systematic, and informative database for international researches of watercraft heritage. These two projects are of great significance to the protection and the study of watercraft heritage, and will provide a solid foundation for transformation and application. The third suggestion is to launch collaborative or exchange exhibition. There are successful cases which have attracted widespread attention in China. Mr. Yu Zefeng, best friend of all of us, for example, collaborated with the National Maritime Museum of the United Kingdom on a photo exhibition. And for another example, a few years ago, the Mass Museum cooperated with our museum on the exhibition of ship models. The fourth suggestion is to jointly train experts, such as restoration teams for Asian ship models. We know Maritimes in Europe also have restoration sites for ship models. Our museum is also training our own professionals for construction and restoration of ship models. However, we think there is still a huge gap between the need and the quality of experts. So cooperation of training may be more urgent. While that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening and putting up with my poor English once again. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Now, if I could ask our three speakers to come back on the stage, and perhaps we could get a second microphone as well, please. So now we have an opportunity for some bit of a conversation and some questions from the floor as well, but good catch. See, that's why you're a Life Fellow. But I'm going to start with a couple of questions of my own, if I may. And my first one really is really drawing on your points this morning. Do you think we are focusing on the preservation of the vessels themselves to the detriment of the stories of the vessels, with the straitened resources that we're all operating in within these days? Matthew, perhaps you have some thoughts?
Is that on? Can you hear me? Yes. Well, thank you for that. I think it's both a very important question, but one that is not easy to answer, in that we need both of those things. And it's, of course, the aura of the real thing that is the USP, the unique selling point that's of so many of our institutions. And without that sense of reality rooted in the past, it's much more difficult to tell the story. But the idea of just capturing a boat without the stories, without the people, is nonsense. It's half a story.
Do you think that sometimes we look better looking at specific objects that tell the story of the vessel rather than the vessel itself?
Well, I suppose it's very easy in the enthusiasm that I was describing, the kind of emotional kind of rush, that we tend to lose sight of that. We can kind of fetishize the object rather than actually embracing the holistic sense of what this kind of, it's like gravity in space-time, isn't it? Kind of this object with all its people and its stories and its connections, actually what it actually meant for people then and now and in the future.
Gentlemen, any thoughts?
Well, I would say the principle of any museum is it's grounded in artifacts, it's grounded in objects, and the notion that artifacts can't mean anything outside of a context, and the context are those stories we talk about. But there are different modalities of learning, and one of them is the tactile connection that ensues when someone encounters an artifact. And ships tend to be super artifacts. They are large scale, they're elements, as I mentioned, of a large scale technological system. And if you're going to provide a pathway to understanding and that pathway does include the experiential nature of it, then a ship is an excellent conveyance to take you there. Just as they once were a conveyance to take you from one place to another, they can take you from one time to another very effectively.
While you have the microphone as well, I know you in San Diego, as I do in New Zealand, and I'm sure many of us do as well, have heritage vessels that operate in a public environment. We take people out on sailings, heritage sailings. I wonder if you'd just like to give us some thoughts perhaps on operating in an environment where you're dealing with modern regulation with a heritage vessel.
Of course, it means it's getting ever more difficult, really, is what it comes to, because the vessels that we operate and that many of our museums operate were built and were conceived and built long before the regulations, which themselves evolve over time. So increasingly, we find ourselves having to operate our ships along, with the same criteria by which a brand new construction is allowed to operate. So there are waivers or exemptions for historic automobiles, historic aircraft, historic steam engines, and so forth. It would be really helpful, I think, if there were an international convention that recognized the value of these ships, and you were able to, by limiting their routes to those which were safe, given the limitations of the ship, recognize their value and develop a set of regulations that applied just to those and didn't consider them in the same category.
Wonderful, thank you. Mr. Zhao, yesterday when you gave your presentation about the museum network in China, it was very impressive, the number of museums that you have working together. I was wondering if you find it useful with that broad spread to be able to share skills between institutions for vessel preservation. And how is that working? Are there any lessons that you have for us?
Sorry, I really need professional help.
Thank you so much. Mr. Zhao mentioned that he's very impressed by the presentations, and we also would like to mention that actually the conditions in China in the museums and exhibition center to present the vessel is very good already. So for example, we have already a big vessel which is 31 meter long. It's from Ming Dynasty, is being presented in China. It's just one of the many good examples. So we are very honored to be here and hear more stories from the professionals, and we're very excited to have more cooperation together in the near future. Thank you so much.
Wonderful, thank you. Have we got some questions from the floor? Oh, yes, lots over this way. I'll run the microphone over. Marika.
Thank you, and thank you for a really interesting session. And I'd actually like to take this opportunity to remind all of you that have English as your mother tongue, please speak a bit slow for all of us who do not have English as our mother tongue. So I have a question for Director Feng Zhao. I'm very impressed by the huge scope of your work. And my question is on suggestion number 1, the database. Because that sounds to me a little bit like the ICMM initiative Glowboat that had its first meeting in Bristol, and where I think you looked at the possibilities of connecting all the museum databases into one tool. So are you at all, have you been conversing with ICMM on this database idea?
Yes, well, we certainly need to be, yes.
think maybe I can answer partly of the question because I was initially involved with the Global, probably most of you know. I think Global project is the one that we gain support from America's foundation. And of course that this project including about all the maritime museums in China. As you know that China has about 45 maritime museums, and each museum has those related boat collections, especially in the Ceiling for More Maritime Museum collects over 156 boat, covers over 54 countries. The short answer is surely that we're including about the maritime museum in China.
Thank you so much. Mr. also would like to add some points. The first one, there's already a very mature, very good database in China for the traditional crafts, for the traditional boat crafts. And the second point is he's very looking forward to work together with ICMM members and everybody here today for further cooperation. And the third point is the database will be open, and the main point is sharing with everybody. And we encourage more cooperations with everybody, especially related to the traditional boat crafts. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hannah.
Hello, my name is Hannah Hagmark. Ray, I was inspired by your UNESCO talk, and I think that one of the thoughts I had was about the trade routes. That you showed the trade route from Mexico to the US. That's been now up on the World Heritage List, right?
Yes, actually, I'm also on the board of the California Missions Foundation, and there's an effort to have all of those missions established as a World Heritage Site as well. What's interesting is that if you drive along the California coastline on US 1, you used to see all of these bells that signify the El Camino Real, the road that linked all the missions.
Yeah.
Well, as far as we can tell, that road never existed in any meaningful way, that the only thing connecting all those missions was the sea route, linking them, sea routes, and they're all in ports. Hence, that would be an example of a trade route linking all of these cultural nodes within one long attenuated site.
But my point is really that if anyone has been involved in trying to get something on the UNESCO World Heritage List in any way or form, you know what a difficult process it is and what a long lobbying process that is. And maybe we, who are interested in maritime history and the maritime heritage, need to work more together to lobby, to have our countries lobbying for putting these things on the UNESCO World Heritage List. And also we must remember that there are other ways, there are other lists like the World Heritage, the World Memory of the World, UNESCO, and there's the Intangible Heritage. And on Little Åland we have two of those. One is the Klink boat tradition, which is a Nordic initiative that we as a Nordic community worked for. And then we have the Gustav Eriksson archives that's recently been taken up on the Memory of the World list. So there are many ways of getting there. But maybe we should work together for that trade route, because I think that would be really exciting.
Vincent, could I just come back quickly on that from a real experience of trying to get the SS Great Britain listed as a World Heritage Site in her original dockyard. 3 times it went through the process with UNESCO. And fundamentally what happened is that legally ships are still classed as movable objects, and therefore they cannot be classed as World Heritage Sites. The Cutty-Sark is one, because she's accidentally inside a World Heritage Site, but that's an exception. Well, maybe this is something that ICMM could pick up with IMO to help lobby UNESCO to modify this, particularly with historic vessels that are not actually going to ever move again. But we have to, I think, grasp the legal nettle to really make change here.
There is a site, for instance, in South Africa that is, it's a series of railroads, but the rolling stock on it, which is movable, is actually considered part of the site. And in fact, there is an effort to have the spacecraft on the moon identified as a World Heritage Site also. I don't know how much it's going to promote tourism, but there's the idea. But the idea is, I think, gradually morphing from the fact that a movable object. And I think for the key is, these are works of architecture. You know, that's the principle. But I think it is extremely difficult. I do realize that. But every single nation has its own national version that I'm aware of ICOMOS. And I think one of the things that would be possible would be to lobby, at least initially, to have a maritime consultant on every nation's ICOMOS as well, and move from that to keep that discussion going and gradually enlarge the definition of what things could be eligible to be World Heritage Sites.
Thanks. It's Carol Scott, and the question really, thank you to all the presenters, but it really is for Matthew. Matthew, you seem to be suggesting that we really need a process of meaningful selection in terms of how we sort of ascertain which boats to preserve and which boats to not. On the basis of your long experience in this area, have you got some idea about what kind of criteria are needed for that selection process?
That I am prepared to reveal publicly. Yes, well, I think in principle, some of the groundwork for establishing significance and international significance between the UNESCO processes of outstanding universal value and the kind of Borough Charter, Venice Charter systems, which are incorporated in conserving historic vessels, the volume that I put up on screen. I think there is a good process there for extracting a little bit more objectively what might be important for future generations. So I think there's some process. The actual reality of moving along that line is very difficult, because particularly when the emotion, as I was saying, kicks in. I think what I'm saying is that we should not resist the emotion, and all of the many great people of whom we know, many of them, there are loads of them doing great work outside this museum. We should encourage them, but we should also, as maritime museums, start to take more responsibility for trying to identify what you might call that core international fleet that we want to make sure is here in 100 years' time actually looks like, and not let it be by chance or accident as it is at the moment.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for your presentations. My name is Sam Hillgartner. I have a question for you, Matthew. We at our Maritime Museum recently deconstructed one of our vessels. We had a decommissioning ceremony. Everyone within our institution felt like it was the right thing to do. However, many of the public still look at it as a great pity. It's very, challenging at times to describe to them why exactly this was the dignified approach to the future of the vessel. I won't go into all the details. I'm wondering if you have any suggestion how to deal with this issue. I've found that even, like you've said, there is a strong emotional attachment that people have to these vessels, and even a kind of pathos-laden response seems to often fall on deaf ears.
Yes, thank you. And it is a very real issue. The deconstruction of De Wadden that I showed on the screen, the schooner in Liverpool, kicked up a huge local outcry. Ironically, of course, in a place that had ignored the vessel for 40 years. So that's a real thing, and it needs to be addressed. And it seemed to me, suddenly in the Liverpool case, ICMM helped write to Liverpool to reinforce that there was support from outside, from others. And I think we have to act collectively to support individual members as they go through that pain, because we know that it's the right thing to do, and we have a clear and rational argument for doing it in the way that we do it. But in order to face that first emotional pain, we need to be acting collectively and saying, yes, this is best international practice. This is what we really need to do. I know it's not very nice, but this is what we need to do in order to be able to preserve something else better for you. And I think you deserve a round of applause for deconstructing.
Yes.
Round of applause.
Well, we have time for one more question.
Hello, everyone. I'm Louise from Paris, and thank you so much for your presentations. I just had a little input on the World Heritage List matter. In France now, we just have the example of a fleet, a whole fleet of the Pendwick ships, which are based in Lorient, and they are all about to become national monuments and be classified as and protected as historical monuments. And so that's maybe, I mean, a first example. And I mean, for France, it's a first case. And maybe it's one step to classify movable heritage as well.
That's very good news, fantastic. Perhaps Fiona is making notes here for ICMM newsletter to pick up that story and share it. That's very good news.
Well, that's all the time we have, everybody. Another big round of applause for our panel, please.